My name is Alba Merrick. I am 70 years old, and I still balance my checkbook by hand. The habit began when I was 20, and newly married, a way to make sure life stayed measurable. Even now, years after losing my husband, I find comfort in the rhythm of numbers deposit withdrawal balance. It is the one language that has never lied to me. That Thursday afternoon, the sun cut through the blinds in thin stripes across my kitchen table. I had just finished reconciling last month's utility bills when I heard the front door open. Cassia never knocked anymore. "Mom." Her voice floated in casual and confident. I looked up from my papers as she appeared in the doorway, wearing heels too high for the tile floor, her phone glowing in her hand. "I was in the neighborhood," she said, smiling in that way people do before a difficult sentence. "Mind if we talk for a second?" I nodded, setting my pen aside. She sat opposite me, laid her phone flat on the table, and crossed one leg over the other. She smelled faintly of expensive perfume, the kind meant to announce success before anyone speaks. "Mom, starting next month," she began, "we'll transfer all your money to my account. That way I can handle everything for you: bills, taxes, groceries. It'll be easier for both of us." The spoon I had been stirring my tea with stopped mid-air. I watched the steam rise, felt its warmth on my fingers. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her, but Cassia's tone left no room for confusion. I studied her face, the calm confidence of someone convinced she was being practical. She tapped the phone screen as if arranging my life required only a few swipes. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice steady. "That sounds organized," I said. Her eyes lit up with relief. "Exactly. You've managed long enough, Mom, but these things get confusing. Let me help." Help. Such a soft word for something that felt like erasure. I wanted to ask what she thought I had done for the past 70 years, if not manage. Instead, I smiled. It was a small, practiced smile, the kind I used at the bank, when a young teller explained interest rates as if I were new to arithmetic. Cassia mistook the smile for consent. She kissed my forehead quick and impersonal. "You'll see," she said. "This will take the weight off your shoulders." When she left, the house felt strangely louder, the refrigerator humming, the clock ticking in long, deliberate beats. I sat at the table until the sunlight shifted and the walls turned amber. Then I opened the drawer where I kept my ledger and began to plan. By nightfall, the plan was complete. When Cassia returned with Ronan for their usual dinner, the lights were on, but the living room stood bare. No sofa, no framed photos, not even the rug. Their footsteps echoed across the floorboards. Cassia stopped first. Ronan's breath caught behind her. I stayed seated in the kitchen, listening as silence turned into shock. Cassia stood in the doorway, her eyes darting across the bare room as if searching for a punchline. "Mom, where's the furniture?" Her voice rose like she was scolding a child. I wiped my hands on a towel and turned from the stove. "Gone," I said. "I sold what was mine." Ronan stepped forward, rubbing his neck. "You sold it." "All of it, the sofa, the sideboard, the television," I said evenly. "Yes." Cassia's heels clicked against the wood floor as she moved from wall to wall. "Why would you do that? Are you planning to move? You didn't tell me anything about this." "I didn't plan to move," I said. "I just needed space." "Space," she laughed sharply. "You can't live like this, Mom. There's nowhere to sit. You're acting strange." I could hear Ronan mutter something under his breath. "Maybe let her explain," but Cassia ignored him. She stood by the empty window frame, her reflection faint in the glass, and crossed her arms. "You've had those things for decades," she said. "The table, the china cabinet. It's not like you to throw things away. Did someone talk you into this? Because if someone's scamming you, I'll handle it." "No one talked me into anything." "Then why?" "Because I said quietly, they were mine to sell." She blinked, caught off guard by the calmness in my voice. You can't just sell things without telling me, she said finally. You should have called. Why would I need to? Because it's your house, she said, her tone softening, almost pitying. And you shouldn't make big financial decisions alone. That's how people get taken advantage of. I folded the towel and set it beside the sink. I appreciate the concern, but I've managed fine for 70 years. Cassia's eyes narrowed. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Ronan shifted his weight. Cass. Maybe? No, she cut in. This isn't safe. You're being irresponsible, Mom. The word stung, but I didn't show it. I worked 2 jobs for 30 years. Paid off this mortgage by myself. There's nothing irresponsible about deciding what stays in my own house. She stared at me, her face tightening, searching for the old version of me, the mother who apologized quickly and agreed easily. I saw the confusion cross her features when that version didn't appear. Ronan stepped closer to her. Maybe we should come back another day. Cassia shook her head. No, I want to understand what's going on. She turned back to me. You're not well, are you? You've been forgetting things lately. Maybe you should see someone about that. I forget less than you think, I said. Her expression hardened. You can't just decide these things without talking to us first. We've been trying to help. Help, I repeated, by transferring all my money into your account. That's not what I meant, she said quickly, her voice breaking at the edges. You're twisting my words. I met her gaze. No, I'm hearing them clearly. For a moment, no one spoke. Ronan rubbed his forehead, looking toward the door like a man wishing for escape. Cassia's phone buzzed in her purse, but she didn't answer it. Finally, she exhaled through her nose. This isn't over, she said. We'll talk tomorrow when you've had time to think straight. They left together, the door shutting hard enough to rattle the glass in the frame. The sound echoed through the empty space. I stood alone in the quiet, the smell of supper still hanging in the air, and realized it wasn't confusion that frightened my daughter. It was the first sign that she might not be in charge. That night, after the door slammed behind Cassia and Ronan, I stayed at the kitchen table with my ledger open. The columns of neat handwriting blurred, not from poor light, but from memory, each number linked to a piece of my life. I had started keeping ledgers after my husband died. Cassia was 12, then too young to understand what words like liability or interest meant, but old enough to notice the silence in our house. I was 38, sitting at the dining table with a stack of bills I could barely lift. There was his hospital balance, the funeral invoice, the notice from the credit union. I remember folding each paper into 3, lining them up in perfect rows, as if order alone could replace income. Back then, I worked as a payroll clerk at a paper mill on the edge of town. My hours stretched from 7 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon. And on weekdays, I cleaned offices at the courthouse from 6 until midnight. I kept both jobs for 10 years. Cassia used to leave me little notes on the counter. Mom, don't forget to eat. Or I reheated the soup. Sometimes I'd come home after midnight and find her asleep on the couch, her math homework open beside her. She once told me she liked watching me balance my books because the sound of the pen scratching on paper made her feel safe. When she was 16, she wanted a pair of sneakers that cost more than a week's groceries. The other girls at school had them. I told her we couldn't afford it, and she cried all night saying she was tired of being the poor one. The next day I skipped lunch and took an extra cleaning shift. A week later, I handed her the box. She hugged me, then ran off to show her friends. That moment was worth the hunger at the time. Rent came due the same week the water heater broke. I remember standing in front of the landlord's office checkbook in hand, wondering whether to pay him or the plumber first. I paid both and spent the next 2 months living on rice and canned beans. Cassia never knew. I didn't tell her how many late fees I negotiated, how many nights I went without sleep to finish the books at the mill. I wanted her to see stability, not struggle. When she turned 18, she announced she wanted to go to a private college in Atlanta. Tuition was $15,000 a year. I had savings, but nowhere near enough. So I went to the bank wearing my best blouse and asked for a loan. The manager called it a brave choice at your age. I signed the papers with a shaking hand, then took on weekend shifts, sorting invoices to make up the interest. 4 years later, she graduated with honors. I sat in the bleachers clapping until my palms stung. She waved her diploma in the air and shouted, "We did it, Mom!" And in that moment, I believed her. But after the ceremony, she joined her classmates for dinner at a downtown restaurant. I waited outside in the parking lot because I couldn't afford the meal. She came out hours later, smelling of champagne, and said, "You didn't have to wait." I said I wanted to make sure she got home safe. I spent the next decade repaying the loan, 10 years of steady deductions from a modest paycheck. I finally made the last payment when I was 62. Now, 8 years later, Cassia talks about my finances as if they were hers to manage. I stared down at the ledger on the table, running my finger along the faded ink. Every column was a record of devotion disguised as arithmetic. I taught her about numbers. She learned about ownership. For years, Friday nights had followed the same rhythm. By 5 o'clock, I would set the table for 3, simmer something in the oven, and wait for the sound of Cassia's car in the driveway. I told myself it was family tradition, our way of staying close. The week after she found the house empty, she arrived as if nothing had happened. Ronan carried a bottle of wine. Cassia kissed my cheek lightly and said I brought dessert. Store-bought, but at least it's sweet. She talked while I cooked, her voice smooth and practiced. Work's been insane. 2 new clients this week. Oh, and we might finally redo our kitchen granite counters, maybe a new island. That sounds nice, I said, though the image of her perfect kitchen made me think of my bare living room. Ronan leaned against the counter. You should see the model homes she's selling, Mrs. Merrick. Marble everywhere. Alba, I corrected softly. You can call me Alba. Cassia turned her attention to the roast. Mom, you used to buy better cuts of meat. Are you budgeting too tightly again? I'm being careful, I said. Well, don't be cheap, she said, smiling like it was a joke. You can't take money with you. Dinner stretched on conversation floating above me like light chatter in a restaurant. They spoke about vacations, new appliances, interest rates. I nodded where appropriate, poured more gravy, and kept my thoughts to myself. When the plates were cleared, Cassia set her dessert box on the counter. Next week, let's do lasagna. Your recipe's still the best. I smiled faintly. We'll see. After they left, I washed the dishes and wrote the grocery total in my ledger, $42.16. Underneath, I wrote 1 new word loss. The next Friday, they came again. Ronan complained about his supplier, Cassia, about her assistant. They ate, thanked me in passing, and left their plates for me to clean. I added another line to the ledger, $48.90 loss. It went on like that for months, the same meal pattern, the same polite disregard. I began to notice how little space I had in my own kitchen once they entered. Cassia would open drawers without asking, rearrange spices, reach for my teapot as if it were hers. One evening as I sliced bread, she said, "You should let me order your groceries online, Mom. It's faster. I'll link it to my account and just pick up the bill." I set the knife down. "No, thank you." She frowned. "It's not about control. I just worry you're making mistakes with these tiny receipts and lists. I like my lists. Old habits die hard, huh?" She gave a small laugh and walked away before I could respond. Ronan tried to lighten the mood. "She's just trying to help. You know how she is." "Yes," I said quietly. "I do." After they left, I sat alone at the table, looking at the candle stub flickering in the center. The plates were cleared, but the air still held the scent of something burnt. Maybe the roast, maybe patience. I took out the ledger again. The page was nearly full. Every line a tally of meals, ingredients, effort. Every note marked loss. "I used to think this was love," I whispered. "But it's a schedule." I closed the book, hearing the spine creak like an old truth finally spoken. I had mistaken routine for relationship. and I knew what had to come next. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Cassia arrived unannounced again, this time without Ronan. She carried a leather folder tucked under one arm, and that kind of determined brightness that meant she had rehearsed something. "Hi, Mom." Her tone was cheerful, but clipped. "You've been hard to reach lately. I've been busy," I said, though my days were quiet as ever, with what she asked lightly. "Don't tell me you've joined a yoga class." I smiled faintly. "Just handling a few things around here." She set her folder on the kitchen table, brushing off imaginary dust. "Perfect. This won't take long." The words dropped like a pebble into still water. Cassia opened the folder and slid a stack of papers toward me. "I've been talking to a financial planner," she said. "He helped me set up something that'll make both our lives easier." I looked at the first page. The header read, "Power of Attorney Financial Authorization." "Mom, this just means I can manage things for you," she said quickly. "Pay bills, deal with the bank, handle taxes. You won't have to stress about any of it." My stomach tightened. "I don't find those things stressful." "You say that now, but come on," she said, forcing a laugh. "You're 70, Mom. It's not about ability, it's about convenience. You'll have someone you trust taking care of you." She said, "Trust like a guarantee, not a gift." I turned the page, scanning the small print. The words were dense legal language and numbered clauses. The smell of her perfume hung sharp in the air, and the steady tick of the wall clock began to sound louder. "It's just a formality," she continued. "People do this all the time. You can still access your account, but I'll handle the transfers, the insurance, all that boring stuff." She placed a pen between my fingers before I realized I was holding it. "Here," she said softly. "Sign here and here." The ballpoint tip hovered above the line, with my name printed neatly beneath. My hand trembled slightly. For a heartbeat, I almost did it, almost handed her the key to every piece of my life. Then from somewhere deep in memory, I heard the sound again, the sharp, startled scream from that night when she and Ronan found the house empty. The way her voice cracked between disbelief and outrage, not fear. It had not been the sound of someone discovering loss. It had been the sound of someone realizing control had slipped away. I set the pen down. "I should read this first," I said. Cassia's expression flickered a quick flash of something behind the calm. "Of course," she said, after a moment. "Take your time. It's pretty straightforward, though. I still want to read it." Her smile strained. "Sure, Mom. Just don't overthink it. It's not a trap." "I know," I said, folding the papers carefully. "I'll think about it." She leaned back in her chair. "Think about it, Mom. There's nothing to think about. It's a simple way to make your life easier. Even simple things deserve a second look." Cassia exhaled through her nose. "You've always been cautious." "It served me well," I replied. She stood abruptly, gathering her folder too fast, the edges scraping across the table. "Fine, read it. Call me when you're ready." Her heels struck the floor like punctuation marks as she walked toward the door. At the threshold, she turned back. "You know I'm just trying to help, right? I know what you're trying," I said gently. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing more. The door closed, leaving the faint smell of her perfume and the folder on the table. I sat there for a long time, looking at the line where my name waited to be written. The pen lay beside it, uncapped, its ink ready. For 70 years, I had followed instructions signed where people told me to, smiled when silence was safer. "I'll think about it." The words still echoed in the quiet room. And for the first time in my life, they felt like defiance. The next morning, I woke before dawn, unable to shake the unease that had settled in my stomach since Cassia left with her folder. The papers still lay on the kitchen table, perfectly aligned, the pen resting where she had placed it. I made coffee, sat down, and turned my attention not to the documents, but to my own ledger. Something in me wanted proof, not of her intentions, but of mine. Proof that I wasn't losing my mind. I went to the small metal filing box in the hall closet and took out my bank statements. My account was with First Southern Bank, a branch I'd used since the 1980s. I'd always preferred paper statements over emails. I trusted paper more than screens. The last 6 months were neatly clipped together. I spread them across the table and began checking them line by line, just as I'd done during my years as a payroll clerk. I wasn't looking for anything specific, but near the middle of one page, I froze. A withdrawal $1,200. The date was 3 months ago. I knew I hadn't taken it. I never withdrew more than $200 at a time, and certainly not from an ATM on the opposite side of Savannah. At first, I thought maybe the bank had made an error, but when I looked closer, I saw another odd transaction, an online furniture purchase for nearly $800, processed the same day Cassia and Ronan had been at my house for dinner. I felt the coffee rise in my throat. The numbers blurred the letters swimming across the page. I pushed my chair back and stood slowly gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself. When my heart stopped hammering, I went to my purse. My debit card was right where it should be, tucked inside the zippered pocket. I had never misplaced it, not once, in 40 years. But I remembered something one evening months ago. Cassia had come early. I'd been in the shower when she arrived. I shouted for her to come in, that the door was open. When I came out, she was sitting at the table, scrolling on her phone. My handbag had been on the chair beside her. I sat back down. My fingers trembled as I reached for a highlighter. I marked the first suspicious withdrawal in yellow. Then I turned the next page. Another one, $400 this time from a different ATM. Then 2 smaller online charges from an electronics store I'd never heard of. The dates aligned like clockwork with her Friday visits. The nausea returned heavier this time. But underneath it, something steadier began to build, an old familiar instinct from years of balancing books and catching errors no one else noticed. I began sorting the statements by date, cross-referencing every withdrawal with my handwritten records. The pattern grew clearer: no errors, no accidents. Every missing amount had Cassia's shadow behind it. I printed a fresh set of transaction slips from the bank's website, each line crisp in black ink. The Georgia branch manager, Mrs. Tolbert, had once told me that the bank kept detailed logs for every ATM withdrawal, camera records, card number, timestamps. I wondered what those tapes might show if someone asked. By the time the sun rose, my table was covered in papers marked with yellow and pink lines. My coffee had gone cold. The air felt heavy, thick with something I didn't yet know how to name. I took out a clean notebook and began writing down each transaction in order, using my neatest handwriting. If I could track payroll for 200 employees, I could track this. When I finished, I placed the papers in a folder and stared at them for a long moment. My pulse was steady now. The shock had passed. In its place was precision, the same quiet, disciplined focus that had carried me through widowhood, debt, and years of double shifts. Still, the thought lingered like a splinter under skin. How do you prove your own child is stealing from you? The next morning, I opened every drawer in the house. The kitchen filled with papers, old tax folders, bank envelopes, receipts, folded so tightly their creases felt permanent. For years, I had saved everything just in case. Now I understood why. I worked slowly, methodically, the way I used to during quarterly audits at the mill. I made piles, checking utilities, taxes, savings, and labeled each one with sticky notes in tidy handwriting. The sun moved across the blinds, but I didn't stop. By mid-afternoon, my living room looked like the inside of a file cabinet exploded. I was knee-deep in 30 years of paper, but I finally had Order 6 folders dated and sorted. That was when I saw it, a bill from Coastal Electric, addressed to Alba Merrick at an address I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it was a clerical error, but when I looked closer, the address matched Cassia's townhouse in the Ardsley Park district. My hands went cold. The statement showed an overdue balance of $340 plus late fees. The account had been opened 2 years ago. 2 years the same time Cassia and Ronan bought their house. I pressed my fingers against my forehead. Oh, Cassia, I whispered. I turned back to my folders, flipping through the stack of correspondence from the bank. That was when I found the next surprise, a pre-approved credit line opened under my name with a balance of $5,000. The card had been activated 18 months earlier. Purchases at furniture stores, electronics, and home improvement retailers all in Savannah. The air in the room felt heavier, as if the house itself had realized what I was discovering. The knock on the door startled me. It was Eulalie, my neighbor from across the street, a retired librarian who'd been bringing me her extra tomatoes all summer. "You look like you're waging a paper war," she said, stepping inside with a small laugh. "Something like that." I tried to sound casual, but my voice shook. She set the tomatoes on the counter and looked at the mess. "You organizing or investigating?" "A little of both," I said. She didn't ask permission. She just started stacking the loose pages, grouping them by color-coded envelopes. "I used to run the archives section downtown," she said. "Old habits die hard." After a while, I showed her the Coastal Electric bill. "That's not your address," she said immediately. "It's my daughter's," I whispered. Eulalie's eyebrows lifted. "You think she—" "I don't think I said." "I know." She didn't speak for a moment. Instead, she reached into the wastebasket beside my desk and pulled out a torn piece of paper. I hadn't noticed part of a bank envelope, the corner marked with my name and account number. "You might need this," she said softly. Her steadiness steadied me. Together, we taped the fragment to the rest of the envelope, matching the tear lines like a puzzle. The full document showed another transfer, $750 to a digital wallet account I'd never created. Eulalie sighed. "She's clever. Too clever," I said, sliding the envelope into a folder marked Evidence. "You planning to confront her?" "Not yet." She nodded as if that was the right answer. "Then you keep records. That's your shield." When she left, the house fell silent again, except for the faint rustle of paper as I turned another page. I kept going until evening, my back aching, but my mind sharper than it had been in years. I listed each fraudulent charge in my notebook, double-checked the dates, and labeled every page with a single word proof. Somewhere in the middle of it all, I realized that grief had slipped quietly out of the room, replaced by something colder and far more efficient. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was an auditor again. And as I looked at the growing pile of folders beside my chair, a question pressed against my ribs like a heartbeat. When you start keeping records, are you still a mother or an investigator? The next afternoon, I carried a folder across the street to Eulalie Temple's house. Her porch smelled faintly of lemon oil and drying mint. She was sitting in her rocking chair with a crossword and a glass of sweet tea, her cat sprawled across the railing. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, when she saw the folder in my hands. "Not a ghost," I said, "just a pattern." She motioned to the empty chair beside her. "Then sit. Let's look at your pattern." I opened the folder on her lap. The papers fanned out highlighted statements, printed transaction slips, copies of the electricity bill. She adjusted her glasses and scanned each page carefully, her pencil tapping against her knee. "She used your name for this account?" she asked. "Yes." "And these charges, furniture, electronics, not yours?" "No." She exhaled slowly. "That's not a mistake, honey. That's theft." The word sounded heavy in her mouth, heavier still in mine. I keep thinking, maybe there's some explanation, that she meant to fix it and forgot. Eulalie shook her head. "You're a kind woman, but you're talking like a mother, not an accountant." I gave a dry laugh. "I used to be both." "You still are," she said. "But sometimes one has to protect the other." She set down the papers and folded her hands. "You know I once made a mistake like this. My nephew, Bright Boy, always said he was going to start his own business. He asked me to co-sign a small loan for a delivery van, just $10,000. Said it was temporary." I looked at her. "Did he pay it back?" Her eyes softened, but her mouth stayed firm. He didn't pay a cent. When he disappeared, the bank came after me, took my savings, nearly took the house. I was 65. I thought helping him was love. Turns out it was just bad accounting. The rocking chair creaked as she leaned forward. We learn boundaries late, Alba, but we can still build fences. I stared down at the pages between us, each one carrying Cassia's handwriting in invisible ink. I don't even know where to start. You already started, she said, tapping the folder. You kept records. That's more than most people do before they lose everything. Now you need someone official, bank manager, maybe a lawyer. Someone who can tell you what comes next. I don't want to ruin her, I said quietly. You won't ruin her. You'll teach her what ruin means. Her words landed hard but true. I felt the tears rising before I could stop them. She reached over and covered my hand with hers, warm, steady, sure. She's your blood, she said, but blood doesn't give anyone the right to drain you dry. I nodded, unable to speak. The cat stretched on the railing, the sound of its claws on wood breaking the silence. Eulalie lifted the folder and handed it back to me. You keep these safe. And tomorrow you come with me to the bank. We'll ask for Mrs. Tolbert. She's sharp and decent. You'll like her. I clutched the folder to my chest. Thank you, Eulalie. She smiled, lines deepening around her eyes. That's what porches are for, listening and making plans. As I stood to leave, she called after me. Alba, remember this. Some family ties you keep, with love others you reinforce with locks. Her words followed me down the steps like a quiet blessing and a warning both. That night, as I set the folder on my table again, I realized I wasn't alone anymore. Who stands by you when family steps away? Eulalie drove me downtown the next morning. The sign above the office door read Halverson and Pruitt Attorneys at Law. Pine Street was quiet, except for the sound of gulls and the distant hum of traffic from the river bridge. Inside, a young receptionist offered water and asked me to fill out a short form. My hands trembled as I wrote my name. It felt strange to see it printed on paper beside the words, client information. When they called me in, the man who greeted me didn't look like the lawyers I'd seen on television. John Halverson was in his 50s, tall, but not imposing. His tie, slightly loosened, his eyes clear and tired in a kind way. Mrs. Merrick, he said, shaking my hand. Eulalie called ahead. Please sit down. I laid the folder on his desk. I've brought everything I could find. He opened it and began turning the pages, scanning each one without interrupting. Only the rustle of paper filled the silence. After a few minutes, he leaned back. You organized all this yourself? Yes, I said. I used to work in payroll. Old habits. He nodded. You did more than most people do before they come in. These records, bank withdrawals, credit line, utility account, they show a pattern. I swallowed hard. I thought I might be imagining it. He looked up, his expression steady. You're not crazy, Mrs. Merrick. You're a victim. The word victim felt heavy. I had spent my life being the responsible one, the caretaker, the woman who solved things quietly. Hearing that word aimed at me was like hearing my name in another language. He continued. What you're describing is called elder financial exploitation. It's when someone, often a relative, uses trust or access to take money or property without permission. It's a crime in the state of Georgia. I gripped the edge of the chair. Even if it's your own child. Especially then, he said gently. The law doesn't look at love. It looks at intent. He reached for a yellow pad and began to write a list in quick, neat lines. Here's what you'll do. First, freeze your credit with the 3 national bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. That'll stop any new accounts from being opened in your name. Second, file an identity theft report with the Federal Trade Commission. They'll generate an affidavit and a reference number. I nodded slowly, trying to follow. Third, go to your bank. Tell them you're disputing the fraudulent transactions and request copies of all withdrawal slips. Georgia banks keep signature records for at least 5 years. If her signature or her handwriting shows up, we'll have proof. I felt my throat tighten. You said her. You mean my daughter, he paused. Yes, ma'am. It appears that way. And finally, change all passwords, email banking, phone access, everything. He looked up from his notes. Do you feel safe where you live? Yes, I said quietly. For now. He gave a single nod. Then we move carefully. No confrontation yet. You let the paperwork talk first. Once we have the reports filed, we'll decide whether to press charges or negotiate restitution. Charges. I repeated the word brittle on my tongue. I know it sounds harsh, he said, softening his voice. But you deserve protection. No one, family or not, gets to take your dignity with your money. I blinked hard, focusing on the edge of his notepad. How long will it take? He smiled faintly. Justice is slow, but it starts today. He handed me a copy of the checklist. I'll file the first report myself and contact your bank manager, Mrs. Tolbert. She'll expect you this afternoon. I stood clutching the folder against my chest. Thank you, Mr. Halverson. He walked me to the door. You did the hardest part already, Mrs. Merrick. You stopped doubting yourself. Outside, the air felt different, thinner, sharper. I walked back toward Eulalie's car, with the checklist in my hand, the word victim still echoing behind my ribs. What's harder, accepting you were robbed or admitting who did it? The storm began just after dusk. The sky cracked open over Savannah rain, sweeping sideways against the porch screens. I was making tea when I saw headlights pull into the drive, Cassia's car wipers thrashing. Ronan's silhouette sat rigid in the passenger seat. I didn't move until they were already climbing the steps. The knock came hard and fast. Mom Cassia's voice muffled through the door. We need to talk. I slid the chain lock across before I opened it. The gap between us was no wider than my palm. What are you doing here? I asked. You've been ignoring me, she said. Her hair was soaked mascara smudged at the corners. We heard from the bank. You froze your accounts. What were you thinking I was thinking about? What belongs to me, I said. Ronan leaned forward, his voice flat. You're making this into something ugly. Cassia was just trying to help. Help, I repeated. By opening credit lines in my name, Cassia's eyes widened. You talked to someone, didn't you? Who filled your head with these ideas? I spoke to a lawyer. Her face hardened, jaw tightening. A lawyer against your own daughter. I didn't go against anyone, I said quietly. I went for myself. The rain pounded harder against the porch roof. Cassia's hand reached for the doorknob, but the chain held firm. Let us in, she said. This isn't how families handle things. Families handle things with honesty, I said. Not forged signatures, Ronan muttered. You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I do, I said, meeting his gaze through the narrow gap. I have bank statements. I have account numbers. I even have the power of attorney form you wanted me to sign. Cassia's voice dropped to a trembling whisper. You're humiliating us. You're making a scene over nothing. No, I said. I'm protecting what's left of me. The porch light flickered thunder rolling close enough to shake the glass panes. Cassia pressed her forehead against the doorframe, her voice sharp with panic. Do you have any idea what you're doing to me, to us? People are asking questions about money, about the accounts I imagine they are. Mom, stop this, she said, her tone cracking. Please, just tell them it was a misunderstanding. I can't do that, I said. That would be another lie, and I'm finished lying for you. Her hand slipped from the knob. After everything I've done, you mean after everything I did? I said, cutting her off. The loans, the tuition, the Friday dinners. You've mistaken sacrifice for obligation. Rainwater dripped from her sleeve onto the threshold. Ronan shifted behind her, restless. We're not standing out here all night, he said. I closed the door slightly, the chain pulling taut. Then don't. Cassia's eyes darted up, glassy and wild. If you shut that door, Mom, don't expect us to come back. I'm not expecting anything anymore. The silence that followed was thick enough to drown in. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Cassia stepped back, blinking hard. Ronan said something low I couldn't catch. Together they turned and walked down the steps into the rain. Their car door slammed, engine starting with a rough growl. I stood there until the taillights disappeared beyond the oak trees. Only then did I slide the chain free and close the door completely. Inside the house hummed with quiet, the kind that comes after a long storm breaks something open. Outside, rain still fell against the porch, steady and soft like the last conversation I would ever have with my daughter. Can silence at the door speak louder than shouting inside? It happened on a Wednesday morning just after sunrise. I was spreading jam on toast when my phone buzzed on the counter. The message was short and clean. Your mailing address has been successfully updated. I froze the knife slipping from my fingers and clattering against the plate. I hadn't requested any change. My heart began to race, that sharp, metallic kind of fear that makes the body move before the mind catches up. Within minutes, I grabbed my purse and the folder Halverson had helped me prepare. The drive to First Southern Bank blurred past the wet pavement, the red lights I barely noticed. Inside, the air conditioning felt colder than usual. The young teller looked up with a polite smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Merrick." "My address was changed," I said, breathless. "Just now. I didn't authorize it." She blinked, startled. "Let me pull up your file." Her fingers flew across the keyboard. "It says the new mailing address is—" She stopped, eyes widening. "That's not your home, is it? This one's on Ardsley Avenue." My pulse kicked hard. "That's my daughter's address." The teller's face changed from confusion to alarm. "I'll flag it immediately. Can I see your ID, please?" I handed her my driver's license. She typed quickly, then picked up the phone. "I'm calling Mrs. Tolbert from security," she said. A moment later, the branch manager appeared, a composed woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled into a knot. "Mrs. Merrick," she said warmly, "you did the right thing coming here. Someone's trying to reroute my mail." "We caught it in time," she assured me. "No statements were sent yet. The request came through online this morning, from a device not linked to your profile." She leaned closer. "Do you have anyone who might have access to your account information?" I forced the words out. "My daughter." Mrs. Tolbert didn't flinch. "Then we'll lock the profile entirely. No remote updates without in-person ID verification." She turned to the teller. "Issue a new security phrase and reset her credentials." The teller nodded and began typing again. I watched the screen reflect in her glasses, rows of data, my name, my account. My life reduced to lines someone else had tried to edit. Mrs. Tolbert handed me a printed receipt. "This confirms your address is secure. You'll get an alert if anyone tries again. Thank you," I said softly. My hands were still shaking. She looked at me for a long moment. "You'd be surprised how often this happens, Mrs. Merrick. But it's rare to see someone stop it so quickly." That evening, Halverson called after I emailed him the incident. "You handled it perfectly," he said. "This goes straight into our documentation. Every attempt strengthens your case." I tried to laugh. "I never thought I'd have a case." He paused, his voice lower now. "You also have courage, Mrs. Merrick. Most people freeze. You act." After the call, I sat in my quiet kitchen phone in hand, the alert still glowing on the screen. I stared at the message until it blurred the words "successfully updated," turning into something else. Another small intrusion. Another battle won, but not yet finished. How many times must I defend myself before my own home feels safe again? 2 weeks later, I sat in John Halverson's office again. The blinds were half drawn, and the faint smell of rain came through the cracked window. On the desk between us lay a single envelope, thick with paper and weight. "It's ready," he said. The envelope was addressed to Cassia Merrick and Ronald Harp. The words beneath it: formal demand for restitution looked cold and final in bold type. Halverson tapped the document once with his pen. This letter outlines the total amount of your losses, $17,000, in direct theft, plus another $3,000 for interest and associated damages. It gives them 30 days to return the full amount or face civil litigation. I knotted my throat tight. And if they ignore it, then we file the lawsuit, he said simply. Once it's public, it can't be erased. He slid the envelope toward me. You don't have to deliver it. We'll send it by certified mail today. But I wanted you to see it first. I traced my name at the top of the page, the black letters crisp and steady. Alba Merrick, claimant. It didn't feel like my name, not yet. Do most people feel this way? I asked quietly, like they're betraying something bigger than themselves. He hesitated before answering. They feel torn between love and justice. But love without boundaries isn't love. It's surrender. His words landed like a verdict. When I left his office, the rain had stopped, leaving the sidewalks gleaming under weak sunlight. The letter was already out of my hands, but its weight traveled with me. That evening, I made tea and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Cassia had once left the power of attorney forms. I unfolded my own copy of the demand letter and began to read. Each sentence was measured and unemotional, every number exact. Fraudulent withdrawals totaling $1,200. Unauthorized purchases totaling $800. Identity misuse through credit accounts and utilities opened under the claimant's name. No embellishment. No accusation beyond the facts. By the second page, my hands had stopped trembling. The words no longer frightened me. They steadied me as if each paragraph rebuilt a wall that had long been torn down. At the end of the letter, the closing line read, "Failure to remit payment or enter negotiation within 30 calendar days will result in legal filing without further notice." I folded the pages carefully, slid them into a manila envelope, and carried it to the small metal safe box I kept in the hall closet, the same one that once held my husband's will and Cassia's college records. When I locked it shut, the click sounded different this time. Not the sound of hiding, but of keeping something secure. I sat for a long while, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the pulse of rain starting again outside. Somewhere between the ink and the silence, I felt a strange peace settle, a peace built not on forgiveness, but on truth. The letter was gone now, traveling toward her mailbox. I didn't know what she would do when she read it, or what 30 days would bring. But as I rested my hand on the cool surface of the safe, I found myself wondering, will justice heal what motherhood broke? The first sign came through Eulalie, not the internet. She knocked on my door one morning with her phone in hand and an expression halfway between concern and triumph. "They've listed the notice," she said. "What notice?" "The county court filing. It's public now." She handed me the phone. On the Savannah County portal, under new civil filings there, it was Merrick Alba v. Merrick Cassia and Harp Ronald. Seeing it in print made something inside me go still. My name, hers, bound together, but not by love this time. Eulalie squeezed my shoulder. "It's official. You've drawn your line." By that afternoon, the whispers had already started. I heard from a neighbor that one of Cassia's friends at the real estate office had seen something strange online. By evening, a client of Ronan's called to reschedule indefinitely. The world around them began to shift, not violently, but with the slow creak of a house foundation, settling unevenly. The next morning I made tea and tried to ignore the newsfeed that Eulalie texted me screenshots of Cassia's social media post. Sometimes family turns against you when you won't let them control you. Toxic people can wear sweet faces. Within an hour, her friends filled the comments. "Stay strong, girl. Family can be the worst. Praying for peace on both sides." And then underneath it, others who still remembered me. "Didn't your mom pay for your college?" Maybe there's more to the story. By afternoon, she limited the post's comments, But the ripples stayed. Ronan called that evening. His tone was clipped professional, the voice of a man trying to manage a crisis. "You could have come to us," he said. "Handled this privately." "I tried," I said. "You both refused to listen." He hesitated. "Do you know what this looks like? People are talking. Cassia's clients are asking questions. I have business partners watching. I'm sure they are." He lowered his voice. "If you drop it, we can fix this quietly." "Fixing it quietly is how this started," I said. "I'm done being quiet." There was a long pause. "She's breaking down, Alba. You're her mother." "I was," I said softly, until she decided I was her account number. He hung up without another word. That night, I went online for the first time in weeks. Cassia's profile photo still showed her smiling head tilted just so, the polished image of success. But beneath the curated perfection, the cracks had started to show. 2 of her closest friends had unfollowed her. A few of her listings had disappeared from the company website. The comments under her toxic family post had dwindled to silence. The internet's sympathy had moved on to someone else. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room. Eulalie called a little later. "You're not reading the comments, are you?" "Only once," I said. "Good. The truth doesn't need an audience. I'm not looking for one." "That's why you'll come out of this whole," she said. "The loud ones burn fast. The patient ones last." I looked toward the safe box in the hallway, the letter still locked inside the chain, still fastened on my front door. The storm outside had passed days ago, but I could still feel its echo in the quiet. When truth is public, who actually wins the loud one or the patient one? The courthouse on Liberty Street smelled faintly of wet paper and old air conditioning. Rain streaked down the tall windows, blurring the courthouse lawn into gray. Eulalie sat beside me in the waiting area, her umbrella dripping onto the floor. Across from us, Cassia and Ronan whispered to their attorney, a young man with sharp eyes and a nervous smile. John Halverson leaned close. "Remember," he said softly, "this isn't about revenge, it's about record." "I know I said." My voice came out steadier than I expected. When the clerk called our names, we entered the mediation room, a narrow space with a long table, 4 chairs, and a box of tissues in the center like an afterthought. The mediator, a calm woman in a beige blazer, greeted us politely. "We're here to explore resolution," she said, "not blame." Cassia avoided my eyes, flipping her pen between her fingers. Ronan sat stiffly beside her jaw, tight. Halverson began first. "Mrs. Merrick is seeking restitution for verified financial losses totaling $20,000 inclusive of interest and administrative fees. The supporting documents are included in Exhibits A through E." He placed the folder on the table and slid copies toward the mediator and opposing counsel. The sound of paper against wood was almost surgical. Cassia's attorney opened the folder, scanning the contents quickly. "My clients acknowledge certain misunderstandings regarding account access," he said carefully. "However, they dispute any malicious intent." "Intent doesn't change impact," Halverson said evenly. The mediator nodded. "Let's keep tone neutral, Mrs. Merrick. Would you like to speak for yourself?" I folded my hands on the table. I trusted my daughter with my house keys, my bank card, and my faith that she knew the difference between help and harm. I worked 40 years for that money. I gave her everything else. All I asked for was honesty. Cassia finally looked up. Her voice shook. "I didn't mean to steal, Mom. I was just trying to make sure things were handled. You've always been so slow about it." "Careful," I corrected. Her eyes flashed. "You make me sound like a criminal." Halverson tapped one page. "The withdrawals, the online purchases, the electricity account at your address, all under your mother's name. Those are facts, Ms. Merrick, not adjectives." Cassia's lawyer murmured something in her ear. She nodded stiffly, then said, "If we repay the money, will this go away?" Halverson looked at me. That's your decision. I took a breath. Repayment is necessary, I said. But not enough. Cassia frowned. What else could you possibly want? I want acknowledgement. Written, signed, and witnessed that what you did was wrong, that you took what was not yours. Her face went pale. You want me to humiliate myself? No, I said quietly. I want you to tell the truth. To yourself, if no one else. Ronan rubbed his temples. Cass, just do it. Her eyes filled anger mixing with shame. You're asking me to admit I'm a thief. I'm asking you to stop pretending you're not. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain against the glass. Finally, Cassia reached for the pen. Her hand trembled as she signed the settlement document, then paused at the line beneath it, the admission clause. Her pen scratched across the paper slowly, unevenly, but she didn't stop until it was done. When she slid the pages back, she whispered, Are you happy now I met her gaze? No, but I'm finally at peace. The mediator collected the papers and nodded to both sides. This concludes mediation. Copies will be filed with the court by end of day. Cassia stood abruptly, chair scraping the tile. Ronan followed, guiding her toward the door. They left without looking back. Halverson gathered the documents, stacking them neatly into his briefcase. You did what you had to do, he said. Outside, the rain hadn't stopped. The courthouse steps shone slick under the gray sky. I stood under Eulalie's umbrella, clutching the signed copy close to my chest. Justice, it turned out, was made of paper, thin, weightless, and impossible to hold without trembling. What does victory feel like when it costs your only child? The envelope arrived 3 weeks after mediation, plain white with no return address. My hands hesitated before opening it, half expecting a note, half dreading a void. Inside was a cashier's check drawn from a Savannah branch, $5,000, the first installment of restitution. The signature at the bottom was Cassia's. The handwriting had changed smaller, tighter, as though she were trying to disappear between the lines. I placed the check on the kitchen table and stared at it for a long while. It looked like progress, but felt like an obituary. When I finally endorsed it, I did so slowly, pressing each letter into the paper with deliberate care. My name had been used for too many things that were not mine. This, at least, would bear my consent. That afternoon, I walked to a locksmith on Whitaker Street, a narrow shop filled with the scent of oil and brass. The man behind the counter looked up from his workbench and smiled. Afternoon, ma'am. What can I do for you? I need all my locks changed, I said. Every door. And I'd like 2 new sets of keys. He nodded, wiping his hands on a rag. Old house, older than my trust, I said quietly. He didn't ask more. By evening, the new locks clicked cleanly into place. Front door, back door, side gate. Even the old shed behind the house. When he finished, he handed me 3 identical brass keys, bound together by a plain ring. There you go, he said. Fresh start. After he left, I sat at the table again. The keys glowed faintly under the kitchen light. I remembered when Cassia had her own copy years ago, when she'd breezed through my door without knocking, humming some tune, certain she belonged wherever she went. That night I threaded one of the new keys onto a thin ribbon I'd kept in my sewing drawer, amber silk faded, but still bright at its center. It had once tied back the curtains in her childhood room. I tied it carefully through the key's ring and hung it on the nail beside the kitchen window. Not as an invitation, just a reminder that every door in this house now opened on my terms. Eulalie came by the next morning carrying a paper bag of biscuits and honey. Her eyes went straight to the ribbon. New hardware. New beginning, I said. She smiled. That color suits you. Strong without shouting. We ate at the table, the check already deposited, the house quiet, except for the ticking clock and the faint hiss of the kettle. You sleep any easier? She asked. Some, I said. It's strange how safety feels heavier than fear once you earn it back. She nodded. You've locked the doors now. The rest will catch up. I looked toward the window, the key glinting softly against the light. She sent the first payment. Eulalie reached across the table, touching my wrist. Then she knows what she lost. I think she knew before the ink dried, I said. For a long time, we sat without speaking, the weight of everything unspoken settling between us. The storm had passed, but the air still held the scent of something scorched, something that had survived the fire but would never quite be the same. When Eulalie left, I walked her to the door and turned the new lock behind her. The sound was clean, final, satisfying. Then I looked at the key on its amber ribbon swaying gently in the afternoon breeze through the screen. It gleamed like a small victory, beautiful, necessary, and impossibly lonely. Can safety ever replace love? The morning air smelled faintly of rain, clean and cool against the open window. I sat at my kitchen table with a blank sheet of cream paper in front of me, my favorite fountain pen beside it. The house was quiet, except for the steady rhythm of the clock above the stove. It had been 3 months since the court settlement, and in that silence, something in me had settled too, but not entirely. I picked up the pen. The words came slowly at first, uneven, like a limb learning to move again. Cassia, this isn't a letter of anger. It's a letter of boundaries. I paused. The ink shimmered for a moment before drying. My hand no longer shook when I wrote her name, but it still hurt. I took a breath and continued. From now on, we will speak only through written correspondence. I will not discuss money, property, or personal accounts. I will not host you in my home without notice. You may visit only if invited, and you may not bring Ronan without prior consent. The words felt clinical, almost cruel. But I had learned that peace sometimes sounds like policy. I still love you. That part doesn't end. But love and trust are not the same. I can hold one without pretending I still have the other. I stopped again, staring at the sentence until the weight of it pressed against my chest. The house was full of small echoes, the scrape of my chair, the whisper of paper as I turned the sheet over to sign my name. Alba Merrick, written in the same careful cursive I had used on Cassia's permission slips when she was a child. When I was finished, I folded the letter into thirds and slid it into an envelope addressed in my neatest hand. The return address label read simply A. Merrick, Whitaker Street. I sealed it, pressed my thumb against the flap, and sat back. Eulalie appeared at the door just as I was slipping on my cardigan. Heading out early, she asked. To the post office, I said, holding up the envelope. She raised an eyebrow. That the one you've been drafting all week? Yes. She followed me down the porch steps, her slippers whispering against the wood. Want company? I nodded. We walked together through the neighborhood, the air still heavy from last night's storm. The magnolia trees glistened, their leaves dripping in rhythm with our steps. At the post office, the clerk recognized me from my many visits to mail forms and statements during the case. Morning, Mrs. Merrick, he said with a kind smile. Certified again. Yes, please. He weighed the envelope, stamped it, and handed me the receipt. There you go. You'll get confirmation when it's signed for. I tucked the slip into my wallet. Thank you. Outside, Eulalie waited beneath the awning, hands folded neatly in front of her. You mailed it, I did. She studied my face for a moment. And how do you feel, Strange? I said honestly. Like I just signed a treaty with my own blood. Eulalie smiled softly. That's how peace looks on paper. We walked back in silence, the kind that doesn't need filling. When we reached my porch, I handed her the extra key, the one I'd tied with the amber ribbon. Keep it, I said, for emergencies. She looked down at it, then at me. You sure? Yes, it's time I choose who holds a key. Eulalie slipped it into her pocket and nodded. Then you've come through the hardest part. When she left, I went back inside and poured a cup of tea. The letter was gone now, traveling through the postal system toward Cassia's mailbox. I pictured it landing there, ordinary in weight, extraordinary in meaning. The kettle clicked off behind me, and for once the sound didn't make me flinch. I carried my tea to the window and looked out at the street. The rain had stopped, but drops still clung to the fence, small and shining like punctuation marks on a sentence I had finally finished writing. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel watched or owed. Just steady. Just mine. What remains of a family when respect replaces affection. A year had passed since the courthouse morning. Savannah's spring air was thick with jasmine again, their scent curling in through the kitchen window just as it had the first week Cassia left for college so many years ago. The house was quieter now, peaceful, but not hollow. The locks gleamed new, the floors carried only my footsteps, and the old clock above the stove ticked steady as breath. I cracked 2 eggs into the skillet, added a pinch of salt, and listened to the soft sizzle. Breakfast was simple these days, toast fruit tea. I no longer cooked for company, only for appetite. On the table beside my plate sat my final ledger. I had relabeled it last month. Final balances. Inside the pages were clean and orderly, each column drawn with a ruler's edge. The first page listed every repayment Cassia had made over the past year. 5 installments on time, each marked in neat blue ink, followed by a single checkmark. I didn't use red anymore. The last entry read, "Paid in full, March 12th. I closed the book and ran my hand over the cover. It wasn't victory that settled in my chest. It was stillness. Like a room finally returned to silence after too many raised voices. The mail came just after 9. I heard the flap of the slot and the soft thud of envelopes on the floor. Only bills and a grocery flyer. I picked them up and laid them aside, then reached for the small brass lamp that sat near my notebook. It had been a gift from Eulalie on my 70th birthday. The base was engraved with 6 words, built by boundaries, kept by respect. I turned the switch and the bulb glowed warm, steady golden. Eulalie had moved closer last fall, renting the bungalow across the street. She stopped by often, usually carrying muffins or garden herbs. That morning, she appeared at my back door, waving through the screen. "Morning, accountant," she teased. "You balancing something again?" "Just memories," I said, smiling. She stepped inside, setting down a basket of lemons. "Smells good in here. I could eat 3 of those eggs." "Then sit," I said. "There's plenty." As we ate, she glanced toward the open notebook. "She's still sending them?" "She finished," I said. "Every cent." Eulalie nodded slowly. "And the letter I never heard back. But she left the post online. The admission one. Yes, it had been quiet when it appeared 6 months ago. A small message buried between her real estate updates. Sometimes we break what loved us most. I'm learning how to build without stealing the bricks. She had never deleted it, never replied to the few comments that trickled beneath. I had read it only once the night it appeared and hadn't checked it again. It wasn't for me anymore. Eulalie looked at me for a long moment. "You think she'll ever come around?" I shook my head gently. Maybe she already did in her own way. The clock ticked between us. She finished her tea, then rose. "You've done what few can, Alba. You turned pain into paperwork and found peace in the margins." I smiled. Old habits die useful. When she left, I stayed seated watching sunlight stretch across the kitchen tiles. The brass lamp still glowed beside me, its reflection warm against the window pane. I thought of how many nights I had sat here alone, afraid the quiet meant abandonment. Now the quiet meant ownership. Outside, a breeze carried the scent of jasmine through the screen, and the world felt smaller, but safer. I opened my ledger one last time and wrote a new entry on the final page, account closed. Lessons retained. Then I set down my pen for good. The lamp flickered once and steadied. Its light caught the corner of the notebook, gilding the edges like a benediction. For the first time, I realized I wasn't waiting for anything, not apology, not reconciliation, not even understanding. Only this, a house I had kept, a life I had reclaimed, and the quiet certainty that what I'd built now belonged to me alone. The jasmine rustled outside as if in agreement. When the light finally stays on, is it forgiveness or freedom?